Hello there. This is a webinar about paragraphs and analysis. Okay, it's been provided by the International Academic Advisors. That's myself on the left, Howell Luff, and also on the team is Pierre Gate. On this slide as well, you can see a QR code. Okay, if you click on that, so you scan that, what you can do is book in MetHub for one-to-one support if you would like, or if you're familiar with MetHub. Otherwise, please feel free to email interacademicadvice@cardiffmet.ac.uk if you have any questions at all about what support we can provide for you, okay? Because we can also provide one-to-one support if you're an international student. Okay, so as I said, today's webinar is about analysis and paragraphs and how these things are linked together. They're linked together in what you read, and they're also linked together in the way that you write. Okay, so it's going to cover quite a few different aspects of this as we go through. Now, this is part of a wider set of skills that we teach in the academic advice team. Okay, and this is a workflow diagram showing the types of skills that we will be encouraging you to develop, and also to separate out and grow your skill in each one of these particularly separately. Okay, so for today, what we're really looking at here is thinking about some planning and paragraph structure, as well as going back a stage and thinking about those analysis skills in that gathering knowledge and evidence stage. And we're going to be linking these together, and all the way through, of course, we've been thinking about our critical thinking skills and how we're applying those to what we're learning from the literature, and also how we're planning to present what we're presenting within a written assignment. Okay, this is most probably relevant to a written assignment, but it could also be any kind of report or even a presentation that you're preparing as well. So this slide here shows you the way that we use literature all the way through our work. You know, sometimes there might be a tendency or a temptation to write the assignment and, oh, I don't have enough references. You go back to literature and you try and find a few things and stand up your points. It's fairly obvious when somebody does that, to be honest with you, so definitely wouldn't recommend that. And the other part of it is that you're learning on the course. A good part of that learning is going to come from you actually reading in your subject about your subject. Okay, so across the whole of the resources that we provide and what we teach in our sessions in the programs, we will look at each stage of this, so exploring, selecting the relevant literature, thinking about analysis, paraphrasing, which is what we're going to think about today. We're going to look a little bit into planning your paragraphs as well, okay, today. And then the writing is easier and it's more effective. So especially if you're not writing your home language when you're doing this course, it's particularly important, I think, to be scaffolding and putting in place as much structure, as much information as you can to enable yourself to write effectively. Okay, if you're writing and researching and planning at the same time, you're putting a lot more stress on yourself, but also the end result isn't going to be as good. Yeah, so these are quality steps to ensure you get a higher grade effectively. Okay, so thinking about the type of literature we're going to be using, we're looking really in most courses for most assessments at focusing on research articles. Okay, so these are published in an academic journal and they are structured in a particular way. And because of they are the result of research, they are the highest quality academic evidence. And that's what your lecturers and markers are going to be expecting. Okay, there's a standard layout for these. Okay, you'll have an abstract at the beginning, perhaps 200 or 300 words explaining the headlines of the article. Okay, so obviously when you're selecting literature, the abstract gives you a fairly good idea of whether that article is going to be realistic and relevant for you. Okay, so when you're looking at an abstract, you know, what are the main points? What are they highlighting? What are they focusing on there? What are the key things they want you to know before you read? It's a very important kind of indication there. And also it should have their main findings. And you probably think, Okay, are they going to be relevant to my work? In the introduction, they're going to be outlining their approach to the problem. Okay, what assumptions are they basing it on? What are their theories and beliefs that they favor in the way they've put the research together? That's quite important for later on when you're thinking, especially at level 7, you're thinking about framing what came out of that literature when you're writing about it as well. Okay, if there's a debate, if there's a created tension between different people within the field about a particular topic, do they disagree with each other? What side of that disagreement do these people come down on? In this introduction is where you might see that as well. Okay, and also within that, they will set out what question they're trying to answer. Okay, what is it? What's their research question? And that needs to be aligned to what you're looking for evidence for. Okay, at which point, you're not going to read on if they're not focusing on something that's relevant to you. Similarly, actually, you're quite likely to go down to the sorry, there's some things missing in my slide here, down to the conclusion at the end. Okay, and you're likely to think, okay, I'm going to have a look at the conclusions, because again, if the conclusions aren't relevant to me, I'm not going to read it. Okay, so one thing to say about analyzing a research article, that's not the same thing as just reading the whole of it. In fact, just reading away through the whole of an article, it's going to be the result of 2 or 3 years' work, possibly by a team of people, written up in a really complex way. If you're not sure that that article is really relevant to you, by the time you finish reading that article, you're going to be confused, because you've gone off into their world and lots of interesting things they've said, and you're thinking, how can I make all of this relevant to your assignment? Well, it may not be. Okay, so we're trying to avoid, unless you've been told specifically that your assignment is based on a particular article, you're very rarely going to read a whole article. You're more likely to be navigating it and sort of picking out of it the things that are important and using some techniques for that. There's a really good, in this series of webinars, there's a really good webinar by Pierre Gates about reading techniques. Okay, I really encourage you to pick that one up and have a look at it. So as we're doing any kind of initial analysis of a research article, we're thinking critically, and we're thinking also, so what? What's the point here? What are the key things that they're trying to talk about? What are the relevances to what I've been asked to write about in my assignment? So if we're thinking about analysing a particular article, particular argument, what is an argument? Well, an argument is a series of points made based on evidence to prove a claim and to conclude that you have proved that claim. Okay, so that might be a whole article, could be seen like that. Okay, there's a claim, there's evidence presented, and there's a conclusion at the end. More likely, what you have is actually a series of interlinked, a chain, a line of argument where they make a series of claims, because those series of claims together present the evidence. Now, in a research article, the evidence is quite often what they've got from maybe they interviewed people, maybe they did some measurements and some statistical analysis. Okay, but you're watching out for this structure. So in analysis, we're thinking about what their main argument is, how they made that up through these smaller sequences of evidence. Okay, so how they're using the evidence to prove what they're trying to prove. Okay, and when you're looking at these, you can think, okay, well, is what they're claiming pretty straightforward? Or is it something that really isn't widely agreed on? Is it something that actually they're going to have to put some pretty strong evidence to overturn what most people would expect? Okay. And if they are putting together, like in this diagram, a series of claims like this, do they all actually fit together? Or could you interpret some of them as not agreeing? Yeah, because there's evidence, but there's also interpretation. You can have an alternative interpretation of evidence, and that might lead to a different conclusion. So you might find some conflict between that. Okay. And obviously, if you're going to be writing academic writing, one of the best things you can do is actually read academic writing, yeah, and get the feel for how people do it. And as you get further into it and you've read a little bit more, you get the feeling that, okay, some people do it very formally, some people do it very fluidly, some people are very wordy in what they say, some people are very straightforward in what they say. And, you know, there's as many different ways of writing as academics, but there are some key things in there. And one of those things is going to be a clear structure and a clear use of that evidence. Because what you have to do is take your reader through this process with you. Yeah, so they end up, they go, oh, okay, that's a good conclusion. I've seen the evidence. That's great. That's what you don't want there to be a confused reader going, how does that all stack up? Yeah, and you don't want your marker or your lecturer to be looking at your work going, they haven't really proved that. I don't really understand how they get to that conclusion. Okay, and often you might have the right evidence, but an insufficient structure. Okay, so if you'd like to practice analyzing an argument, okay, you could use this example that I provided here. Okay, so this is an opportunity for you to possibly pause the video and have a think about this article, find it, okay, and then identifying the main argument. Now, this is quite an interesting article because it comes up with some things that are quite counterintuitive. So as you sort of skip through it, and you don't read the whole thing, just have a quick go through the abstract, the conclusions, maybe have a skim read of the introduction. What's their main argument? What's the main claim? Okay, and think to yourself, how do I find it? What techniques do I use to find that? Okay, and if you've got that main piece of evidence, or rather that main argument, what piece of evidence did they use to support that argument? Do they have some key bits of evidence? Yeah. And if you're doing it with somebody else, you can maybe have a discussion about how strong you think that evidence is, or reflect yourself. Yeah. And is there any tension from your point of view? If you look and you interpret their evidence, would you come to a different conclusion? Okay, brilliant. So I'll move on now. As we're looking at articles, we're thinking very carefully about what the article means. It's really important that you apply critical thinking to yourself as well. Okay, and that's not being critical in a harsh, unkind way. It's actually being honest with yourself, saying, how well do I really get this? How well do I really understand it? And it's not a problem, looking at that person's face in that photograph, you know, that's not necessarily a bad face, is it? Someone's hit something, you go, right now, I really, really don't get that. Okay, what do I do? How do I get past that moment? Okay, and that's a learning process, a very important learning process. So what we're looking to do is be very organized when you're reading. Lots of staff will say, my students are reading things, but they're not picking up on key terms. They're not researching what they mean. They're coming across unfamiliar words, but they're just reading straight past and not kind of being concerned about the fact they don't understand it. If you find things in an article that you don't understand, it's fantastic because it's an opportunity for you to learn a bit more. So have a notebook or a file on your computer where you can start to build a glossary. All right, so you put the word in, you look up a little bit what it means, you start to write yourself your own definition of it. And as you come across it again in future, you can also think, oh, okay, I know a bit more about that. And in my subject, this word means this. So what you'll find is you'll build up a little bit more of a picture about what that word actually means in your subject. Okay. And sometimes these words and phrases are actually terms of art. They're important key concepts in your subject. Okay, and once you have a good rounded understanding of those, you understand the things you're reading a lot more. Okay, a term of art, by the way, is just a word or phrase that's used in your subject, where the professionals in that subject have a deep and clear understanding of what that means. So in another context, it might not be clear to somebody, but in that particular subject, it's understood well. Okay, and this digging into what you're reading and being really reflective about how much you understand something is a really important part of your learning process. Okay, and requires a bit of thought. And you got to remember at that point, yeah, that hitting something you don't know is, it's a good thing. Yeah, it's not a bad thing. So it's a fine thing. If you find yourself worrying about something and really not understanding whole swathes of it, then maybe you need to go and get yourself some help from a member of staff. But hitting a word or phrase you don't know is a learning opportunity. Okay, so we've talked very generally about analyzing an article, but this is very much, reading it, thinking about how you're reading it, and knowing that the parts of it inside. But for strong critical thinking, what we want to do is move from a descriptive way of thinking about it. Well, they said this or they said that, which would be more descriptive. We want to move into an analytical frame of mind where we're breaking down what's been said in these articles. Okay. And in some subjects, but probably in all subjects to an extent, being systematic can be very, very important. If claims are being made and you're comparing claims between different articles, you need some way of breaking those articles down and really understanding exactly what they're saying. Okay, now one way of doing this is to use a standardized checklist for this process. Okay, and I'll show you that in a second. What we're looking to do is use a tool that allows us to think about one aspect of the paper at once. Okay, so one at a time. And when you're then comparing later on, you talk about this particular aspect, you've got available to you that aspect from all these different forms that you filled in. And then you're able to do direct comparison and evaluation between those things. So you can operate analytically at a very detailed level between these professionally written research papers. Okay, so that's what we're doing. And also, it might give you that insight into whether actually it's really something you want to cite or not. Superficially, I mean, you first look at it and might, oh, this looks pretty good. But as you do that deeper analysis, there we go. That might be something you want. So there are two places that you get them from, and others possibly as well. Okay, CASP is a very, very good site because it's actually it's about critical appraisal. As you see, they're the critical appraisal skills program. Okay, and they have a checklist there. I'm just going to adjust my screen for a moment, so bear with me for a second. There we go. I'll just open this up for you so you can see. There we go. So I'll just share my whole screen so I can get this out for you. Okay, so this is CASP, Critical Appraisal Skills Program, and they have a number of checklists here. Okay, so they have information about how to use them. And let's have a quick look at one of the checklists in here. And this is open to the public. You don't need to have a login or anything here. Okay, so you can choose the exact type of study. Okay, so randomized controlled trials, qualitative studies checklist, diagnostic study. So any particular exact type you're using. Okay, so if we have a think about, where's it here? The qualitative one. And then we can open the checklist. Okay. So if you were doing a study and you were looking to really analyze your literature, and especially for something like an end of course personal project or a dissertation, this is a really important stage. So as you can see, it starts to ask you about different aspects. So here, the results, methodology, recruitment strategy for the sample. Yes, it's really breaking it down. So what you do is you have the form open and you read the question, you go back into the article, find that piece of information, type it into the form, or you have a yes no. Okay, so you can do either notes in here or yes no. And then it goes on to analyze results. And then these other questions, it goes into a bit more depth. There we go. And then you can put your points into there as well. Okay, so it's not a form you would use once, it's a form you would use for each one of your key studies. So if you found, 20 sources, but you maybe got 10 or 8 really key important sources that you're going to be talking about a lot, they're really relevant to what you're doing, then you would maybe use one of these checklists. Okay. Okay, so that's the form based. Okay, the Centre of Evidence-Based Medicine at Oxford also has these as well. And you might find others out there as well. And it's worth asking the staff on your course whether there are specific ones that they would recommend or they would prefer. Okay, so that's the analysis side of it. Okay, it's worth pointing out as well that people are used to maybe the idea of doing that sort of systematic analysis on quantitative papers, okay, so scientific results or statistical studies, but actually you can do it for qualitative studies as well. So if you're working in psychology or in the social sciences, that you can still benefit from that. And it gives you that real depth of analysis. So when you're writing up, you're making your points based on really careful comparison of these different papers. Okay. Well, for qualitative studies, you're looking for specific things as well, aren't you? Looking for credibility, so whether you can depend on the results in there, whether you might be able to confirm those results. Okay, so can you really get to see that link between the relationships of data and the findings? Okay, could these findings be transferred to other situations, which is part of the point of using the study in a way, isn't it, as well? And the reflexivity aspect, is how reflexive are the researchers being, and are they engaging with their own positionality in respect to the work that they're doing? Okay, these slides will be available after the workshop. So you can follow up with that with these articles here as well. The Stenfors article is particularly good. Okay, so if you're looking at getting yourself set up with an approach to analysing articles, especially as you move towards your dissertation, perhaps it's a really good idea to read that article and think, okay, where am I at with this? What's my approach going to be? And using some of these tools as well. Okay. Fantastic. So that's the forms-based aspect, that you get that ready-made form from somebody else, and they're forms that you apply to individual articles, and you would use those consistently. So you'd use the same form as much as you can across the piece. Okay, so you've got those consistent set of forms that you can work. But you yourself can create some tools that can help you to do that analysis and to bring that analysis together in preparation for planning and writing. Okay, and so you can create your own tables here, and you can design these to meet exactly your needs for what you're looking at and what you're planning to do in terms of writing. Okay, so if you're looking particularly to compare things like the type of methodology in a study, or you're looking to get the main findings for each study and compare them, or perhaps even you've got some studies that are quite similar, but you want to look at the type of evidence that they used, you can create your own table and put that work into a table, put that information into a table. Okay, now usually we'd start in a table to have things like the title, the author, and the year. That's basic information. Maybe we'll put in there also the research question they were looking to answer, so we have that ready to hand. So imagine you're writing or planning your paragraphs and you're writing about these things. It's very handy to have that instantly to hand. When you're writing, or especially planning and then writing, you don't want to be going back to the original article. Yeah, you want to have that information boiled down so it's ready for you to use. Okay, it might be important to you to know, like I said, the methodology. Do they use interviews, questionnaires? How did they go about that? What are the strengths um, of that uh, research? What were the limitations as well? So you're looking now very evaluative now. It's much more critical. This really supports critical writing very well. And what were the main findings that came out of their study? So if you imagine you had a table of that, when you're writing or thinking about planning that, you can access that very quickly and you're comparing between the sources all the time. Okay. So here's an example of this, a literature table. Okay. So here, each one of these rows there, that would be a different article, okay? And you've got the information in these boxes as you go along, okay? It's quite handy to have this in a spreadsheet rather than in Word, okay? So if you're going to do this, it's quite handy to put it into Excel so you can start doing things like searching and ordering things. You can, for instance, sort by year. You could sort the whole list by the author if you're trying to find somebody, you know. Um, so it's worth kind of playing around with it a little bit as well. But I wouldn't wait until you're using this in your dissertation for the first time. I would start to use these in some of your assignments during the course, so that when you get to that point of doing your big piece of work, you've got these methods working for you already. Okay, so this type of table is what I would call a summary table. You're gathering together probably your main articles, and you're getting all that information really easy to access and really easy to combine and compare. When you're doing your synthesis, you're bringing all that information together. Now this table takes that approach a little bit further, okay? Because what you've identified is certain themes from the literature that you want to manage. You want to manage information on these particular issues in the work. So maybe you're a little bit familiar with these papers now. You know that maybe these five are your key ones, but you want to be able to maybe compare their definition of something. Yeah, or maybe you want to have a particular issue and see what each one says about it. Okay, so imagine if you're thinking about the definition of this thing, PLE. Okay, so if you've written this out, your notes out in this form, then when you're writing, it's very easy for you to say, a definition, maybe it was first coined by Atwell, yeah, and Drexler's definition maybe were quite similar. And you write a little bit, I paraphrase, and then Amberg, Reinhardt, and Hoffman said something slightly different. You can see how it's very easy for you to access that and start to write about it. And the other point to point out very strongly here is that you're not copy and pasting into these tables, you're writing it out in your own words. So it's always important in your notes to be drafting your paraphrases, beginning to do that paraphrasing process. Okay. So if you're not familiar with the concept of paraphrasing, this is where you are saying the person's idea in your own words. Okay. It's one of the most important ways that we avoid plagiarism. Okay. Because you can't put every single idea you've got from somewhere else in quotes, because you won't have an essay, you'll have a rag bag of other people's quotes. Okay, so you're bringing these ideas together and you're synthesizing these ideas into your paragraphs that make up your work. What you're doing is you're saying, right, okay, they said this, and you're saying it in your own words, and then you're citing and referencing it. Okay, so we need to start that early in the process. So thinking about starting to write these paraphrases into our notes. So you read it in the article, right? What do they mean by that? And you have a go at paraphrasing it yourself. By the time you've handed in your assignment, you probably redrafted that paraphrase 2, 3 times. So you're improving it as you go along. Okay, it's a really important part of the way that we work. Okay, so that's the synthesis table. And the reason it's a synthesis table is for these individual issues or topics, you're bringing together, you're synthesizing those different ideas about the same thing from these different articles. Okay, and that's the point of that. That's how it becomes synthesis. So as you go along, you are constantly in this process of critically using these tools, but building your understanding as you go along. Okay. And if you are feeling that you're going in and out of being a bit confused, a bit unsure, getting it, okay, that's a sign that you are in what we would call the zone of proximal development, right? That you're on the edge of your learning. And that's a good thing. If everything you write is completely straightforward, or everything you read rather is totally straightforward, you get everything, you're probably not learning very much. Okay. Yeah. If you imagine you're going on a driving lesson or something and it's really, really easy, you know, do you really need the driving lessons? You probably learned it already. So we're always trying to get at that point. So it feels a bit challenging. That's where we're after all the time. Okay. And especially when you're doing some, undergraduate or postgraduate course, it should be a bit hard, shouldn't it? So if we can set ourselves up to expect it to be a bit hard, that's perfectly okay. All right. So the important thing is how you react in that situation, using the glossary idea of creating your own ideas, maybe writing down what it is you don't understand, having a look at that, spending some time solving that problem before you move on. So everything that you have difficulty with is effectively a learning opportunity. Okay. So what we're going to do now is we're going to swap over into planning paragraphs. Okay. So this is very tightly linked to what we've just been talking about. Okay, because a paragraph is the building block of your assignment. Okay, so 9 to 12 lines long on a word processor, usually on a computer. And we need to be, when we're planning, if you imagine that you come to write that paragraph, you don't just start a new paragraph because the old one looks a bit long, right? It's got a purpose, right? What is that, the purpose of the paragraph? Which references are you going to use inside that paragraph? You decide that ahead of time. And what's your game plan? What are you trying to do with this paragraph? How are we going to use that evidence? Are you using that evidence just to give all the good points on a certain approach? Or are you looking at three different ways of looking at one problem? Yes, you have that idea in mind about the paragraph. That's your planning process. Okay. So we're really looking at writing being a quick process of turning your well-planned paragraphs into a text, into a draft. Okay, so that should be taking about 30% of your time. Okay, so think about it. If it's taking much longer than 30%, you're probably not prepared to write. Okay, so we really should be preparing to write. So have a think about this for a moment. Okay, you've got the Peel method, and you may have come across Peel, maybe not quite sure what it is, but it's a paragraph structure technique. Okay, so point, evidence, explanation, and link. Okay, so this is someone's thought about their paragraph. They're thinking about what evidence am I going to use? I've got these references, Danielson, Bright, Zipes, Sorensen, Stevenson, Simmons and Stevenson. I've got this. Okay, so how am I going to put it together? Well, the first thing we do is actually at the beginning, we give a topic sentence. And that first sentence is there. It's setting out, this is what this is about. Okay, so this is opening the paragraph, making it clear to the reader, this is what this paragraph is about. And when you're writing your plan, what some people do is they actually write a draft of their topic sentence in their plan, right? So they're really clear, right? This is what I'm doing. This is what I need to prove in here. The second thing in this, the second section here is the purple section, which is then the evidence that they're using. Okay, so if you notice that they actually are explaining a little bit as they present the evidence. Right? The green bit, which is the last sort of quarter or so at the bottom there, that's actually, you can see it starts with this means. So this evidence means, and then they're doing their analysis. So they're laying out how this builds into the argument that they're making. So remember that your paragraph is one step in your building up of your argument, right? So your topic sentence says, like, this is what I'm moving on to. This is my new point that I'm making. And then your analysis shows the relevance and the impact of the evidence into your overall argument. Okay, so how does it work to all that? And then at the end, the link, sometimes it's a sentence at the end, but if you're planned very well and your paragraphs clearly lead on one from the other, the link is in the way you've written the whole thing. Okay, it clearly is linked. Sometimes you might find it helps to put something in at the end, but if you're putting a link sentence in and it's a bit different from the rest of the paragraph, you might think about maybe your relevance needs to be a bit better so that your link is more natural with the rest of your work. Okay, so when you're building up your plan, it's very useful on a computer to use bullet points. Okay, so you can start off by deciding what the major sections are, and then you break down those major sections into individual paragraphs. And then you can see here that you can also then put your references into that paragraph. So what evidence am I going to use? Right, that's the evidence I've got for that point. Okay, what order am I going to put them in? Oh, I'll put them in that order, and maybe a little bit of information about what your game plan is, how you're going to go about it, maybe a draft of your topic sentence as well. Okay. Now on Word, they also have something called outline mode. Now that's quite useful, outline view, because if you want to take a whole section and drag it to another place, it will take everything else with it. Okay, so it's really worth having a go and having a bit of a play with outline view in Word, because at the planning stage, we want to be able to move things around, because you might think, oh, that's really great, but it's in the wrong place. Okay, and it's a bit easier to move things around in outline mode than it is to just using bullet points. But even bullet points will be useful for you. Okay. When you're planning, the introduction and conclusion, sometimes they can be problematic. You know, if you're unlucky, you might be asked to kind of write an introduction for something before you've really planned it out. Okay, and obviously an introduction is telling people what's coming up in the whole essay. Okay, so unless you have to write it ahead of time, what I'd probably suggest is you have a little heading or something where you just treat it like a bucket. You put in your ideas as you go along, as you're planning everything else. Put any ideas in introduction in that place, and maybe at the end just have another little heading where you just put ideas in the conclusion, but not try to plan them too much. So once you've got your main argument laid out, it's a really good time to go back to your conclusion first. So what are my conclusions really going to be here? Because that might have changed as you've thought about the evidence, you've thought about your argument. And then once you've thought about your conclusions, go back to your introduction and go, okay, what do I need to say in my introduction? Because that might have changed now that I've developed the rest of my plan. Okay, so think of using the little buckets for that as well. Now you might be thinking, oh, okay, this is great, but I've only got, 2,400 words, perhaps. Okay, so obviously you'll need to check on your assignment brief, but the usual rule is you can go 10% over or 10% under. Okay, if you're 10% under, the marker is allowed to just stop reading at that point. They'll just stop at the word count. Okay, although they'll no, sorry, if it's under, then the marker has to assume that you have missed things out. So they will discount your mark against that. Okay. If you're over by more than 10%, then they can just stop reading. Okay. So it's important that we're managing our work in light of that word count. It's important for you. And also it's a good skill to have, academically as well. But in truth, if you've planned in a really rich, full way, you're more likely to be going over. Okay, but going over is not the end of the world. Okay, and taking 100 or 200 words out of an assignment by getting rid of redundant words or getting rid of that sentence that doesn't really say very much, that's good because it tightens up your work. So the expression in your work is going to be much stronger because you've done that tightening up process, which you can get from removing words. So it's a good habit, it's a good skill to develop. Okay. If you do have an assignment that's got a really low word count, 1,000 words or less, what you're likely to be doing is creating a really rich plan, a really rich bullet pointed plan. And then at some point, you'll probably find that plan is about 500 or 600 words. You're then just churning those into sentences. Okay, so the structuring and the precision of what you're doing with your evidence is more important the smaller your assignment. Anything much below 2,000 words, especially something, 1,000 words or so, it's really about planning. It's really like a planning exercise. And then you write out, and you're just converting that plan into sentences. Okay. All right, so there we go with the content for today. Um, we've got one more of these to do a bit later this week. The AI workshop by Dr. Gate. Okay. Thank you very much for going through this with me, and please do get in touch using the contact details on the first slide. If you like a one-to-one session, or you would like to, if any questions you've got about the provision that we give international students. Okay, fantastic. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.